So today we're going to be looking at what changes from Act 1 to Act 2 and why. So while Beckett does write Act 1 and Act 2 in very similar patterns, they're not merely just a copy and paste of each other. So why is this important? Well, let's take a look. So first, before noting the differences and explaining the differences, we're going to start by saying what is similar in order to bring out those differences. So we have the tapping and checking of hats by Vladimir, Estragon's boots and his obsession with them, Vladimir reminding Estragon of what happened the day before, in the beginning of the acts, contemplating suicide by hanging themselves. There's also a very similar structure for each of the acts. They follow the following pattern. So Vladimir and Estragon meeting up, Pazzo and Lucky arriving and then leaving, Vladimir and Estragon alone, then the boy arrives and then leaves, Vladimir and Estragon alone again, and then the curtain. And they both end the same way too. Well, shall we go? Yes, let's go. They do not move. Almost the same exact writing, except this comma right here is a question mark in Act 2. Very insignificant though. So what does this all mean? Well, the objects, objectively, they seem very meaningless. They're not very important. They're all considered accessories. The hat's especially considered accessory. But for the men, they're both Estragon and Vladimir. They're needed for their existence and their meaning in this play. Vladimir is seen as a thinker with his hat because it's put on his head and it shows that he is an abstract thinker. And that's the only thing that really one of the things that defines him. And then Estragon, with his obsession with his boots, shows that he's trying to stay attached to the ground, attached to earth, down to earth, more concrete thinker. This gives him a definition in life, in both the acts. It kind of makes him stand out for both of them and defines him as a character. The past reminder that Estragon gets from Vladimir shows that and reminds the audience that time is in fact moving. It's not just a repeated thing again, just in very different words. Even though the acts seem to repeat themselves, the time reminds us that time is moving, and this means that the events are seen as monotonous. Like even though time is moving, everything is still the same. It kind of shows that there's a sort of boredom and a sort of repetitiveness instead of just seeing things at a different perspective. And the fact that this is mentioned in Act 1 shows that possibly this could have been the same. These acts could have been replicated from previous days. It's been exactly the same as what we see in these acts. These acts just serve as a snapshot of what has happened, what is going on with these two men waiting for Godot. And lastly, their contemplation of suicide shows that they're always thinking about an outlet from this cyclical, monotonous pattern. It's seen as an outlet and a sense of freedom from this cycle, this endless cycle. But they never seem to be able to escape from it. It's always elusive. They never have enough rope, or their rope is not long enough or not strong enough. They argue about it and they can't come to terms with it. And so they just move on with it. They're kind of trapped in life in this case. And this kind of shows that death is the only one that chooses when you leave this pattern, this life. And the pattern is just showing the cyclical nature of the play. Everything seems routine, not too much happens. But this cycle is kind of showing the day-to-day life of a human. This shows that this is the reality of what's going on. There's not really much happening. Everything pretty much the same, and there's not much to expect to differences. Because the differences will, in the end, they just don't mean different that much. This is kind of reflective of insanity in the sense that you can expect to do the same things over and over again and expect the same results. This is the sort of absurdity aspect of the play, as it shows that there really is no point in what we do in life because the results will be the same regardless. But in another hand, the cyclical nature of the play, everything being the same, kind of primes the mind for the audience to pay attention to these differences. So we'll be more attentive to seeing, what's actually changing in the play between the acts. because if we're used to what's going on, we'll be automatically attracted to these novel stimuli in the second act. So to move on from here, we're going to start looking at the differences, but first, here is a brief intermission.
Some of the things that change from Act 1 to Act 2 are that 1. Pazzo loses his watch. 2. He is suddenly blind and cannot move around as easily as before. 3. Because of this impediment on his movement, he is now being guided by Lucky instead of controlling him as a slave. And finally, 4. The dead tree from the beginning of the play all of a sudden has sprouted leaves. To begin, we will be looking at the theme of time. The whole play itself has a cyclical structure where it seems like it is never ending and it just keeps on repeating itself over and over again. This, of course, leads to the idea that all of the characters within the play are just living within this purgatory-like world where all they could do is just sit around and wait for this mysterious Godot. Without any sense of time, any character who does not possess any knowledge or control over it can be viewed as someone who is above the rest of the regular characters. This is where Pazzo's watch comes into play. So, when we are first presented to Pazzo in Act 1, he is described as having a watch, which he uses during his encounter with Gogo and Didi to make some sort of reference to time. This is shown by the following quotes. But I must really be getting along, if I am to observe my schedule, and but I see what it is. You are not from these parts. You do not know what our twilights can do. Shall I tell you? This control over time that Pazzo has is paired with a description given for him, where he's described as this dominant and almost egotistical character. This can be seen when he boldly introduces himself to Vladimir and Estragon, stating, I present myself, Pazzo.
After Pazzo loses his watch, he becomes a feeble and blind man who needs help wherever he goes. This help, of course, being Lucky, he now uses as a guide instead of just any other slave who he can sell whenever he wishes. He now depends on Lucky for survival, and this can be seen symbolically through the rope connecting Lucky to Pazzo, as it is shorter in Act 2 as compared to in Act 1. Pazzo has now become like every other character within this play. He has to suffer in this world where time is cyclical and no one has any sense of it. Pazzo even directly states how he has lost his sense of time when he states, Don't question me. The blind have no notion of time, as seen on page 77. After Pazzo loses his watch, he also becomes conscious of his own heartbeat. This can be seen where the guys are discussing the sound that Pazzo is hearing, and after he is told it is his heart, he sadly states disappointment in response. This can go alongside with the symbolism of the tree in the story. The tree itself changes from Act 1 to Act 2, since it suddenly grows leaves throughout the play. This is to show how although all the characters seem to be trapped in this world where time to the characters is repetitive, with the same actions repeating over and over again, time in reference to the seasons and the aging of humans is still moving linearly. Without his watch, Pazzo is also now in this nonsensical world in which time to him might not be moving forward. It actually is, and the tree is an example of this, once again as previously stated, with the sprouting of leaves from the first act to the second. He has lost his godlike status he held when he had his watch, and thus blends with the rest of the play's characters as he is forced to live in a miserable and depressing lifestyle.
So the last thing we're going to mention is a possibility of a change that we may or may not know could be a change, but um, based on too little information, we're not exactly sure. But this is the boy when he talks to Estragon and Vladimir concerning Godot as a messenger. And it could be possible that the boy who talks to them in the first act is different from the boy in the second act, completely different. And I'm sure that the group doing the boy as a topic will go through this in more detail. But what we're going to say is that we find that the boy in the first act is saying that he has a brother who is always attacked and harassed by Godot all the time. Um, and it seems like the second boy seems to match this description perfectly as that brother, since he is reacting to Vladimir's lunge towards him as as a sort of like an instinct. It's sort of that he's kind of used to this physical abuse. And this difference in favoritism in brothers can show that this could be a biblical illusion, and this could be used to build Godot's image as a god figure. So since these could be interpreted as gods, the boys can be seen as the two brothers, Cain and Abel. One brother's offering was accepted, but the other one's wasn't, and this kind of brings up the god imagery that Godot seems to have. He seems to have this sort of power over these two boys in that sort of sense. So in conclusion, across the acts, you could see that they are largely similar. In general, there are many similarities between the acts, from the patterns to the contemplation of death and things like that. So what we see different in both the acts seem to be very significant. We see them and they stand out to us because we're so used to seeing the same thing over and over again that we're automatically being attracted to these novel stimuli in both of the acts. But however, what Beckett aims to show is that in the end, despite these major changes, such as possibly becoming blind and moving from a position of power over Lucky to relying on Lucky, and Lucky becoming mute in the second act, everything in the end is the same for the two men, for Estragon and Vladimir. The same exact lines. Well, shall we go? Yes, let us go. They do not move. This is reflective of the absurdist belief that no matter what happens in life, the end is always the same. Every day may seem a little bit different at first, as in like there's very small little changes here and there. That's a little bit out of the ordinary, but nevertheless, it's all just pointless routine with very small changes, and everything in the end. And in the end, you're just going to meet death, and that's your only escape from this cycle. But there's no way to seek it directly. So that just kind of shows that from this play we find that again we do not find a purpose in life because everything is acting the same over and over again. I think that's it. Well, shall we go? Yes, let us go.